Well, we have another large crowd, so it's nice to see everybody here. We even have a couple from North Dakota came all the way just to see this today, believe it or not. First of all, I'd like to introduce my mother, Mary Carter, who's there, and wife, Paulette, who's here today again. And I usually have a bevy of cousins, but I only got one here today, Bernie, back yonder there. Before we start, Susan Dyer would like to make a short speech. It doesn't have to be that short, but.
And I wouldn't call it a speech. I do want to remind everybody about a couple things going on at the History Center this week. Thursday is the first of our Memory Lane Cafes. These are dementia-friendly programs, so if you have someone in your life that's living with dementia, bring them along. This is a free program. It's an hour. This first one is on gardening, so it'll be really fun to be able to get your hands into the dirt and work with some plants. So that's the first in a series. I'll leave these up here if anybody's interested in the rest of the series as well. And then we also have on Friday the reception for our new exhibit, the Michelangelos of Monroe, which is on the limestone carvers of Monroe County, and this is called Meet the Carvers. So we will have carving demonstrations along with a panel discussion of some professionals and artists who are going to talk about how they are part of the modern limestone industry. That starts at 6:30. That is also free to the public. So please join us this week. We've got lots of fun things going on.
Thanks, Susan. Now, as always, as is our habit, I have our Minister of Propaganda, George Carpenter, make a few comments. Oh, you have to have that.
Good afternoon. I'd like to, first off, introduce my wife, Mary Carpenter, who has endured with me for 51 and a half years. Thanks everyone for coming. I'd like to thank the Legion and the volunteers here. Would particularly like for you to be grateful to our servers. Otherwise, we have to go back to the kitchen and pull the food out ourselves. How many of you are here for the first time? If you would like to be on our email distribution list, please leave me your email address at the end of the session, and I'll be happy to take care of that. And as always, thanks to CATS, the cable access television service that comes here. They make it available for you when you're not able to be here to attend this in person, that you can watch this on YouTube. And it's a very, very good resource to be able to do that. And I thank you for coming here today to help us make history, remembering history. Thank you.
Thanks, George. Oh, also, we always have a large following from the BHS Bloomington High School class of '64. So just raise your hands, anybody who's in that class. And so it's not to make you feel bad. What year was it, Mark? 71. Okay, we get the class of 71. I guess. Okay, here's a list of the future meetings coming up. And boy, we're booked quite far ahead. And these are always written in pencil because something always happens. People being people, they have to make trips. You know, people get sick, they can't show up. Things change, so it changes back and forth. But this is a lineup as of now. On July 16th, we have a bonus program because we've got 5 Tuesdays that month. That one, Hillary Fleck of the Monroe County History Center will give a program entitled Peter Matthews Civil War Diary and the 19th Indiana Infantry. On July 30th, our Minister of Propaganda, George Carpenter here, will give a program on the history of the Monon Railroad. And George knows a lot about the Monon.
No, I don't.
August 27th, John Summerlot will give a program on Indiana University and its military history. September 24th, this will mark the bicentennial month of the First Presbyterian Church in Bloomington, and local historian Owen Johnson will present its history. He was here before and gave the program about Ernie Pyle. October 15th, another bonus program. Brad Cook, the curator of IU Photo Archives, will return to show more vintage photos. He's been here, this will be his 5th time, I'm pretty sure, something like that. October 29th, Randy Richardson, another past presenter, will give a program entitled Once Upon a Time in Monroe County. These are stories from her past, and she has a blog that comes out weekly from the History Center, and these stories are often on it. The earliest story is from 1857, and the latest is about a business that began in 1920 and is still doing well. There'll be something that piques the interest of everyone. November 26th, local historian and author Derek Ritchie, another guy who's been here about 5 times, will give a program on the Labortoe and Hunter mansions on North College and North Walnut and the families who resided there long ago. In December, we had to change that date because our regular day would be the 31st. We figured that may not be too good. Even worse would be the 24th. So we slid it back to the 17th. So Hillary Fleck will return to give another program on the women's suffrage movement in Monroe County. 2020 will mark the centennial of the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote. Indiana ratified that amendment January 26, 1920. January 28th, local historian David Nord will return to give a program called Power Transport Machinery, the Revolution in Flour Milling in Indiana, including Monroe County. February and March are open as of this time, but probably not for long. We'll get them filled. April 28th, Michael White and Adam Stillwell from Cats TV will give a presentation on the origins and history of local cats. They go back around 45 years, which a lot of people probably don't realize. So we're looking forward to that. Now, to bring us to today, Christine Friesel of the Monroe County Public Library, who's been here 5 times, I think, right? And there's a reason for that, because she's really good. Her program is entitled Top 10 Topics from the Timeline. It's an overview of her timeline project, highlighting 10 topics that intrigued her the most, which oddly and strangely, but there's anything wrong with that, covers a lot about Prohibition in the 1920s. There will also be references to Lawrence Langer, who worked on the Manhattan Project and was later involved in developing the cyclotron at IU. In addition, I guess there's some local criminal activity back in those days, which is always interesting. So here we go with Christine.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Too close. George, stay away.
Don't you careful how you use it.
I know. I know. Thank you for having me back to the History Club, and thank you, the American Legion, for hosting. These are the 10 topics that I fell into and couldn't get myself out of. I needed an intervention in some cases, especially the Underground Railroad. There's some things, these are not the most historically significant, important things you need to know about Monroe County. You'll go through this list and go, but she didn't recognize this, she didn't recognize this. It's really personal, and probably too personal. I spend a lot of time on drinking and religion, so I've got the good and the bad going back and forth, which is very interesting to me, the 1920s in particular. But there's one topic here that I really do feel like, if you guys don't throw tomatoes at me today, I would like to,
keep pushing the conversation about our military heritage in town. And I know that there's another talk coming up, but if it's not good enough, I'm going to come back and do one of these on military, if I'm worthy. So thanks for having me. This is topics from the Monroe County Timeline, which was a bicentennial project with the History Center, IU Archives, and the Public Library. And this is an online website. We're pretty much wrapping up the project. We'll come back later, probably to add another shot in the arm for data, but we're kind of taking a break from now. You can search this way. There are 31 topics that you can pull down on the menu here. But just keep in mind, there's also a printer friendly. So if you know a teacher or somebody who needs to repurpose the content, they can export it into an Excel spreadsheet. So you can get a timeline of limestone, timeline of crime, and you can, in some cases, you can get mapping coordinates so you can find out where these things took place. So again, these are things that are curiously interesting to me. First thing was lakes. I've been a public librarian for about 24 years, local history for about 10 or 11, and I knew water was an important conversation for Monroe County. It was always there. But the water history, I think, really was interesting to me. This shows Clear Creek in southern part of town, obviously, and there was supposedly a Native American battle at Cedar Bluffs in 1811. There's only one oral history newspaper article that references it in detail, so we have no documentation. I suppose there are arrowheads out there, but that was very interesting to me. So this is where they think it took place, which was Cedar Bluffs. And the guys who were on the top of the bluffs had the advantage because they were aiming their arrows down, but guess what? They got thirsty. And so the guys on the ground were sort of looking up going, we're just going to wait until you get a little thirsty and then we're going to get you then. The city built the Bloomfield Road water plant in 1893, so that's a big gap. Leonard Springs, most of you know that was a failure because of the karst. But it wasn't until 1922, and this is, I think, what the tipping point was. And forgive me, I'm going to have to read some of the slides because the information is too detailed. So I think this was the thing, with a combination of some other major fires after this, that really got the town to press on the city to do something about the water situation. A 13-year-old arsonist, his last name was Davis. He terrorizes the Bloomington town, I think around downtown, for a whole month. One evening, in a span of 3 hours, he sets 9 different fires. And just remember, we have a hard time putting out the fires. He's caught later running away from a fire on South Washington Street. I always want to know what happened to him, but that's another rabbit hole I'm not going down because I'm over it. So this was in 1924. This photo shows him. It's out of a book. I don't know where the original photo is, but I sure would like to zoom in better, but I don't think I can. This is a mass meeting downtown. Businesses closed, so everyone could go to this mass meeting. This is a Come to Jesus meeting where the city is just like, we've had enough. But I do think it was the emotional terrorism that went on, and that little arsonist, they didn't know who it was. They didn't know it was a 13-year-old boy, but they didn't know what was going on. And it was very frightening because your house could go. It was just emotional time. And so this, I think, those arsonists contributed to this mass meeting. Of course, after that, they built Griffey Lake in 1925, so they did do something. If you missed my talk on the Underground Railroad, that was a full hour and 20-minute talk about what we discovered about the Underground Railroad in the Timeline Project. But I just want to, we call it the Hannah Project now because there's a group of us who are coming together to try to figure out what more we can find out about Hannah, who we believe was one of the Underground Railroad conductors of Monroe County. Hannah McCaw was an African-American woman who had money in 1852, so that when she gave the money to her husband, black man Henry McCaw, he was able to buy land out by Brewster's Ice Cream on West or East 3rd. So that parcel, we think, was played a part in the Underground Railroad. We are not going to find evidence, but we just keep marching on, trying to figure out if we can connect some dots. But the reason we found Hannah, most of us that I'm working with in the history industry here did not know about Hannah. Maybe our predecessors did. We like to think she had some fans. But it was in 1901 that her grandson, Willis Tyler, who's an attorney, graduate from IU, who knew the Wiley family, who was, obviously he had some friends who helped him get into law, elevate himself to get an education and to get into IU. In 1901, he's on the lecture circuit talking about the Underground Railroad. He says his grandmother, Hannah McCaw, ran the Underground Railroad in Monroe County. And when I read that, I said, what? I've never heard of her. Who is she? Lo and behold, this moment in my career is like one of those moments that sustains you for a long time. You're like, I can't believe I get paid to do this. I found out that Hannah was the mother of Lizzie Breckenridge. This is a photo of Lizzie Breckenridge. She's a servant for the Wiley family, IU Wiley family. She serves them for 40 years. So when she dies in 1910, there's no diaries, no letters, no archives, so she can't, apparently she didn't talk. She didn't leave a trace. But her grandson in 1901 is talking about it. So we're trying to figure out what's going on. And did the Wiley family know about Hannah running the Underground Railroad? And did they not talk about it because obviously they're going to get arrested, they're going to compromise IU, compromise their livelihood. And Lizzie, I'm thinking, she doesn't want to get her mother in trouble, and she likes what she's got going on with where she is. She dies in 1910. And then in 1917, the Dean of Education, Henry Lester Smith, who is a descendant from families who ran the Underground Railroad, writes an oral history about the Underground Railroad, and he outs a bunch of family names. He does not mention Hannah, he does not mention the Wileys, but he certainly mentions all the roads that you travel on: Gordon Pike, Smith, Morse Pike. If you drive around southern Indiana, or southern Monroe County, the roads that you drive on, you're going in Covenanter, Presbyterian, and you're starting to connect the dots. So we're looking at Monroe County differently, this Hannah Project group. We don't know what we're going to do with it, but we're having a lot of fun. Henry Lester Smith said this area on South Rogers was near a stop of the Underground Railroad. Not this building, but where this building is now. This building, the GIS says it was built in the 1890s. But right across the street from this, what's going on now, Switchyard Park is being installed. And so we hope that the Switchyard Park can incorporate some of the Underground Railroad stories in that area. And this is Gordon Pike on the 1856 plat map. This is Perry Township, section 16. It's a lot of land. But this, you see, the Underground Railroad may have benefited from the sound of the railroad as the slaves would run through north. They probably used the railroad whistle as a landmark to guide them. And of course, the creek would also be a navigation helper. So this led me to the Presbyterians. So then the third topic is religious institutions. This is a photo of Isaac Reed. His oral history is that he helped African Americans leave slavery as he was coming north to preach in the Presbyterian network. So he comes in 1819. So we become a county in 1818. A year later, Reverend Isaac Reed, I sure would like to know if he's related to the Reed Quarry, but I'm not doing that just now. He's using the courthouse to hold his services, but the oral history is that as he was going from town to town, he was moving slaves in his wagon. So in 1821, the Reformed Presbyterians, they established a church. 1827, James Ferris arrives. Most of us know that his house is part of the Underground Railroad, according to oral history. Thomas Smith and Ferris are from Chester, South Carolina, Chester County, South Carolina. And a bunch of those Covenanters all came up at the same time to set their own idealistic place in Monroe County. I assume they used a land agent first, and then they all came. And these are the Presbyterians that set the tone for early Monroe County. So I really believe if you want to understand our history, you've got to understand these Presbyterians and what motivated them. Margaret McCullough, the teacher who served in Monroe County, educated IU President Bryan. She started in the Civil War in a one-room schoolhouse. And during the Civil War, she and Hunter were motivated strongly to put kids in their own grades. So that graded school system, she was part of that. She was our first school superintendent. She was born in 1835, and of that Presbyterian group that came from South Carolina, she was the first child born out of that group in Monroe County. So again, we're talking educators who are Presbyterians who are coming with the purpose of setting a new place without slavery. And she knows Hannah McCaw, the African-American railroad conductor, because they owned land near each other. And Margaret McCullough educates Hannah's daughter, so much so that she helps Hannah get into high school, which was a big deal for an African-American girl at the time. So all these Covenanters work together. The Presbyterians really set the tone to elevate us all in early Monroe County, which is a pretty muddy place. I'm sure it was very muddy. The railroad comes in 1840s, or 1854, 53, 54. So there's a lot of excitement going on, but there's still a lot of mud. Okay, does anyone know who this woman is?
Oh, yes.
Does anyone want to make her mad?
Susan B. Anthony.
Susan B. Anthony. So she came to Monroe County twice. And in 1887, the second time she came here, it was the Presbyterian Church that hosted her. Now, she was a Quaker, but I guess they needed a place. And again, this is 1887, after the Civil War, of course, but again, the Presbyterians are really leading this town, and she comes for a visit. I really would like to know where she stayed. I don't think that's going to find out. The cities and towns we could spend a lot of time on, but I just wanted to focus on Ellettsville. I'll go through Ellettsville quickly, but the township was platted in 1837, and then Richland Township, but then the town was named Ellettsville. The railroad comes in 1853. The town incorporates right after the Civil War. We incorporate, but keep that in the back of your head that it's after the Civil War that Ellettsville sort of gets its proper legs. But in 1890, the railroad Monon tells Ellettsville, you've got to pick a new name. And I'm thinking, why would a railroad company go to a town and say, I can see if the post office says, we've got two Ellettsvilles, that we can't have that. But it's the railroad company that tells Ellettsville, you have to name your town. You can choose Gretna, or you can choose Logan. And Ellettsville said, screw yourself. We're not riding the railroad. And there was this big boycott. I mean, I don't know how many people were in Ellettsville at the time, but they said, no, we're not using the railroad. We're not changing our name. Well, the railroad station caved. I suspect that it was the size of the sign. Do you think that the standard that the letters had to be so big and they didn't want to spend the money on the sign? That's my hunch, because Logan and Gretna is a short. But I think that Ellettsville people need to know that they stuck to it and they said, go jump in a lake. In 1780 or 1871, John Matthews, the father of Indiana limestone. If there's anyone from Lawrence County here, I know that upsets you, but he is sometimes referred to in some sections of the land as the father of Indiana limestone. Lawrence County doesn't like that. I think it's because he had 11 children. He had more children. Was it Dr. Foote? Who's the father of Indiana limestone for Lawrence County? I don't know. But this limestone guy, he was in Ellettsville at a time where the world was, or the United States was at war, but after the war, he had everything in place to respond to the rebuilding of the nation. So after the war, 1876, he buys this land where you see his mansion out there. And gradually they build it into this beautiful, elegant place. It's not too far from the blasting areas, I suppose. I think his wife had china shaking on the walls from the dynamite, possibly. But he was totally ready to go. The railroads was going by his quarries, and Chicago had a fire in 1871, and he was ready to ship them limestone. So everything was going his way. I know he suffered because he lost his son in the Civil War, but things are looking up for John Matthews. So Monroe or Ellettsville history really needs to understand that. So that, of course, leads us to limestone. It's Limestone Month, everyone. The first limestone house, we think, is built in 1828. 1827, the first limestone quarry opens. Does anyone know where that is? Steinsville. Well done. 1862, Matthews opens his mill. In 1882, the Italians are recruited to work in the limestone industry. So just, again, hold that in the back of your head. We'll come back to the Italians later. But going to the 20s, this story gripped me. In 1922, Joseph Groff, this is like 100 years after limestone quarries are established in Monroe County. So 100 years later, Joseph Groff is a master limestone carver from Stuttgart, Germany. He comes to live with the family, the Schakowsky family, on North College. They live at 411 North College, which is right north of the Graham Hotel or Argentum Jewelry, just right north of that. The Schakowskys run a boarding house, and in that family household is a young boy named Winfred, or Doc Schakowsky. And Groff is staying at this house, and Doc is learning all the exciting things from this German immigrant who says, I am going to turn the limestone industry totally around in this town and make it an artist once they see my stuff. So this is a photo of Groff and McIlveen, Albert McIlveen, and they come into business together. And they get the commission to do lots of things. But right across the street, up the block and right across the street, and again, we're still in the 20s, they're building this. I don't know how long it takes them to build this, but I think Doc Schakowsky was probably around running the streets as a young boy, being so inspired by Groff that he also got the bug. And so he's watching this building go up. And later, Graff and McIlveen get the contract to do the Alexander War Memorial on the courthouse lawn. But I talked to Doc's daughter, and she says, my father did that work. But he put their name on it because that was the way it was done. But she said, my dad did all that work. And later on, I found an interview where Doc Schakowsky said he did that work. Yes?
Well, were these Freemasons then, or do you have an idea about that?
The Freemason history is a good, it wouldn't surprise me. I know that you wanted to stay connected. You wanted to know who was doing what, and that inside secret society, you benefited from it. So it would be interesting. If you want to do a history on the Freemasons, I think we'd all love to hear it. Yeah, you had a question.
Yes, that one city center there on 60th College.
Yes, this is across from the jail. This is where the radio station is, One City Center, across from the old post office. But this is dedicated to Freemasonry. So I think a lot of ceremony was held in here, and a lot of kinship, and obviously a lot of fraternity and support was in there. I don't think women were in there. Next topic is media. So in 1855, one of the newspapers thought it would be a good community benefit to publish 204 names of people who went to the secret political party meetings called the Know Nothing. This newspaper said, these are all the people who go to those awful Know Nothing political party meetings. And the list of people included the newspaper's enemies. I was looking, I converted this to a spreadsheet, and I looked at it compared to those people who are helping the Covenanters. and the Underground Railroad. And I was trying to see if there was a pattern between, because the Underground Railroad was running in 1855, 1854, 56. So this is the time, and I thought, is there a pattern here? But I didn't see one. I don't, for instance, I saw some slave catchers. Henry Lester Smith says some of the slave catchers, he says these were the bad guys. And this newspaper lists some of these quote unquote bad guys on there. So I don't quite understand the Know Nothing Party. I think it was a short-lived party that was Protestants saying we're a little concerned that all of these Irish guys are coming probably to fix up the railroad, and they're messing things up. So the Know Nothing was anti-immigration, anti-Catholic, anti-Irish. Well, not anti-Irish, probably just anti-Catholics because they're Protestants. But it was a short-lived party, and it didn't do very well. But they said, if you do not think your name should be on this list as a racist, then you just submit your name to the paper, and we will clear your name. So just think, put yourself in your, especially if you're a woman, and you're trying to get a boyfriend, a good man, right? You can't vote. You need a buggy. You need some nice clothes. You know, you don't want to die in childbirth, so you want access to a doctor. You're thinking, what can you do? Well, you can't. How do you respond to this type of blackmail? Well, people did write to the paper. I am John Smith, but I'm not the John Smith that that paper says I am. And it was just, it was effective. And I suppose it worked. I'm not going to talk about the Civil War, but just keep that in mind that this is on, this Know Nothing, this outing of people for which side they're on, goes in the newspaper, and then we have a Civil War, and you think, okay, we're going to come together after the Civil War, we're all going to get along. But there's an important element still, especially for the ladies, and I can't stress this enough. I don't know what you would do. You can't vote, you don't have power, you don't have land, you just have to go with the flow. And if your older brother is an alcoholic, brute, he's always in the newspaper, and the newspaper is entertained by your brother's shenanigans, and your name is Shatowski or Polkowinski, I think you would move. So if you ever wonder why your ancestors moved, look to see if they had a brother who was...
They moved him.
So in 1909, this is just these are just two examples. I'm going to talk more about the newspapers. In 1909, Smithville News publishes an article called "A Freak." It is our county treasurer Register. Anybody heard the name Register? He just recently refused to accept additional fees for collecting delinquent taxes. So he's a tax collector. Any office holder that will refuse legitimate money is certainly a freak and certainly deserves a great deal of credit for it. Now that ended nicely, but they really wanted to sell papers, and it worked because I'm using this same clip all these years later. So yay to Smithville newspaper. I saw they were for breaks. In 1910, Colonel Bill Horchgenspitz and Deacon Jason Snodgrass got up at 4 a.m. to see the comet. And from the way they wobbled back to the town after a visit to Joe Skillen's Blind Tiger, they must have seen a half a dozen comets with 2 tails apiece. Now, the History Center should get on this. Who is this Horchgenspitz? Is a deacon really religious, or is that an endearing term? So I did find Snodgrass's, George Snodgrass, who was getting in trouble with the law for drinking. But again, I'm assuming they're making this up because they're creative writers. They just need an outlet for writing. But in 1910 or 1911, the newspapers were clearly getting frustrated with this prohibition. In 1907, the state of Indiana said it is okay for police to go up to grocery stores, bars, and just find out if they're illegal or not. And so they had the power to go in and seize the liquor. And if you were operating a saloon illegally, selling liquor illegally, then you were known as a blind tiger. And so 1907, this is 1911. I think the town is getting a little tired. What side are you on? I don't know about you, but I've got some family members who want to know right away, what side are you on? Do you get the extra piece chicken or no? And I think that this was very common back then, especially, do you drink or not? Oh no, I don't drink, except in the basement. And the lights are out. So this wet and dry, the newspaper decided that this is a big issue and it's time to come out. So the newspaper came out, We Are Wet. And that was Feltus, Parks, Buskirk, Howe owned a car. That might be helpful. Of course he's wet, he owns a car. He's gonna help move things.
And a carpenter.
And a carpenter.
Go back to that.
Yeah. Are you related, George?
No relation. Absolutely no relation.
Pardon me, that was the Bloomington Weekly Courier. And then but the Daily Telephone in 1922 is saying, we are the official Republican Party newspaper.
That's right.
So a lot of people think back then everyone got along, and today is so different. Back then, I think they really needed to have a side on the newspaper. I remember a woman came into the Indiana room, we were looking for an obituary, and I said, well, we can't find it in the telephone. Let's try the Courier. And she said, oh my God, my mother would never let the obituary appear in the Courier. Because I know of a boy, Fullwider, he was a writer and or an artist, and he left a memoir, and he said he got a job as a boy delivering papers for the opposite side, and he was terrified that his grandfather would find out, but he needed the job. And so it was real, this line of back and forth. So this is the 20s I'm just trying to paint.
Those
Yeah.
columns, what
Go
was
ahead.
that building? What was that building?
This is the Courier building where Chase Bank is now, I guess, across from, no.
That's the telephone.
This is, I'm sorry, this is a telephone.
The one
And,
before it was Courier.
and this, I believe, is Chase Bank is now
Yeah.
at the corner of Kirkwood and Walnut College.
Just south of that. Just a tiny bit.
Okay.
West side of the street.
Yes.
Chancellor Wells somehow came into possession of the columns, and he had no place on campus to have them featured. So they are now at the IU track and stand on the back stretch of the IU track.
I'm glad maybe we can use them.
I never had figured out why they needed to go to the IU track.
It's like the Olympiad.
Yeah.
It would inspire you to run faster.
Well, there were several Olympians at the track.
So in 1923, so this is when the wet and dry, the political atmosphere of journalism is really hot in Monroe County, and this is when Ernie Pyle takes off. He quits school and he goes and gets a job. So it's a very exciting time for journalism and media. And lots of people are debating, I'm sure. Kitchen table conversations are really hot. Okay, this leads me to, after alcohol, we're going to talk about public health. And I do believe this is an issue. People, I didn't have a slide for women because I believe the public health issue really, we should bow our heads and thank the women for making us wash our hands. 1874, the Women's Christian Temperance Union is established. And I believe, I'm not an expert on booze history, but I believe these women in 1874, that's 10 years after the Civil War, and they were getting a little tired of the drunks coming home. Those drunks could be veterans, possibly, who got used whiskey quite a bit on the field just to make it. And I think 10 years later, these women have had enough, and they were trying to stop and clean us up a little bit. In 1892, a woman named Lena Beck, this is a photo of her when she graduates IU in 1876, but she becomes the state president of the WCTU. And so this woman is living on South College, across the street from where the convention center is. There's an empty lot there. Is Derek here? We won't talk about empty lots. But that's where her house was. And she is grew up an Adams girl, and the Adams were limestone executives and bankers. And the twin limestone houses that are across from Seminary Square, that is the Adams brothers. So just north of those two twin houses, if you're heading towards 3rd Street, on the right is Lena's house. Lena married Mr. Beck, but Lena in 1890s is saying for the whole state, I'm running things now. So think about that in Monroe County. You've got the banker's wife who's running the WTCU for the state, and you've got the limestone executive's sister. And so things are pretty intense in Monroe County. Which side are you on? And if you are caught drinking, what side are you going to be on in the morning? In 1913, the local WCTU says, no, in 1913 they install a water fountain. So they say what men really need, and it's not just men who are drinking, but it seems to be the pattern that they just need a water fountain. So let's have a water fountain. So they put in a water fountain in 1913. But it's the same ladies in 1918 when they tell the Showers girls who are walking around in their overalls in downtown. WCTU goes to Showers and says, "Nuh-uh, those girls cannot be walking around in those overalls." It must be upsetting. Don't quite know yet why. Maybe they can hide their flask in the overall pocket. But in 1966, that water fountain is moved. But keep Lena in the back of your head. Quickly, we're going to go through some public health. Of course, we had a poor farm in 1824. So that's not too long after we were established as a county. We had a farm, or farmhouse and land dedicated to helping the poor. You had a question?
Yes, that's the same poor farm that's part of the county fairgrounds now?
There's Cars Farm
No, there was a poor farm out
by the airport.
Yes.
Yeah, there are two, I think. I don't know which one this is. Probably by the airport. No, it bothers me. I don't know that. In 1848, the public librarian, they couldn't get anyone to be a librarian at the courthouse, and so the guy lifted up his hand and says, "I'll do it as long as I can practice dentistry while I'm doing the books." So again, so in 1848, we get a dentist who happens to be the librarian. We have a cholera epidemic in 1851. From the water fountain, no. In 1905, we have women are raising money for the hospital. Nursing school gets into Indianapolis in 1914. And just jumping way ahead here, I don't think we get a psychiatric clinic until the 60s, late 60s. I suppose there are some mom and pop psychologist shops around before in the 50s, but I just don't know. I really would like to know when's the first time you could go to see a shrink, anonymously, obviously, besides the priest or your neighbor, girlfriend in her kitchen table. When was the first time in Monroe County you could go for, if you weren't going to drink, when could you see somebody? I'd like to know when that option came available, but I think it was the late 60s. And then in 2008, we're using proton beams to cure cancer, so it's a big progress there. But back to the hospital, the women come together and they make this house, the hospital, in 1905. And it's the same women, the local council of women, these do-gooders, these progressive women who say, enough, we're going to clean things up, and we're going to make you give some of the money to make sure that we can improve situations here. So they build the hospital and open it up in November 29, 1905. By December 5th, they're giving their first surgery, and this is Dr. Eigenmann, for Eigenmann Hall, a zoologist. He's the first one to go under the knife. He lives. And the first baby is born in the hospital in 1906. So I think as a historian, it's good to know when were babies born in the hospital. Well, our first one was born in May of 1906. And the woman, this is a picture of the baby all grown up. She is the daughter of Mrs. Cummings, who her husband was Edgar Cummings, a geology department. So these are educated couple. And but this is a picture of the baby Edith as she's grown up. So I'm going to pause here. Again, I want to stick around in the 20s for a little bit, and we're going to talk about Esther Beck. I'm sorry if you've already told you about Esther Beck before, but she was a student. And newspapers, when they write about the tragedy of Esther Beck, they refer to her as being 26, but she was really 29. She's only 2 months away from finishing her nursing program at IU, but at this time, when things got bad for Esther, she was taking a break from school. This is the only picture I could find of her, but this is the daughter of Lena Beck. And if you've ever had a mother who's sort of everything and perfect and wonderful, running the state, telling people not to drink, suck it in, stand up, sit up, don't do that. Lena Beck was educated and motivated, and this is one of her daughter. Her name is Esther, and she's trying to be a nurse, and she just can't cut it. Something's going on. And in 1920, oh, here's another picture of her mother in older times, but again, this is the same person I'm speaking of, the woman who's trying to clean us up and keep us from drinking. And this is a photo of their house, or not a photo, a map of their house. This is the Fullwider, is this where High Speed Tire is? No, that's not where it is. This is Madison, this is 3rd Street, this is the Beeline Bridge, this is Morton, the Beeline, and this Methodist Church,
Yes.
that's where the convention center is.
Right.
Across the street, or
Central School.
Central School, across the school is where the Beck's family live. And Mr. Beck is a Latin and Greek professor, but he's also the superintendent of the schools. So everyone across the street know the Beck family, know the Beck house, and everyone knows who Lena Beck is. She's the one who's always telling you not to drink. Yeah,
Question. You mentioned the two houses, the Adams.
the Adams houses.
Is this immediately north of that where the American Legion used to be?
I don't think it's the American Legion. I think it's further north.
Okay.
So I do think it's that empty parking lot right across from the convention center.
Okay.
Right now it's a parking lot. But so everybody in high school knows, and this is probably where Esther went to school. But she was known to be a contemplative walker, and on a Friday night, Esther told her family that she was walking over to her sister's house for dinner, but she never arrived. The weather wasn't that bad. It was a Friday evening. It wasn't that bad. But that was going to change. She didn't show up, and the town sort of freaked out. And because her uncles were bankers and Limestone executives, Chamber of Commerce people, they arranged a search party, and the plan was that whenever anyone found Esther, they would trigger the whistle at the Showers factory. And so a search party was assembled, and it wasn't just a search party of friends. And I'm thinking, how are people communicating in these days? When something bad happens, you pull in your neighbors, right? At this point, no one cares if you drink or don't drink. You're looking for Esther. So IU president, he gets out and walks. He calls the boys at frat houses, and they start to walk. They drain Lake Griffey, or the University Lake, twice. They're looking for her, thinking that she's headed towards campus. But they can't find her. And remember, it's February, and it's getting cold, so the family's starting to panic. It's Saturday, they haven't found her, and still no sign of her. But let's see. She got stuck in the mud. She was found in a field by a Sunday school teacher who was heading Sunday morning. And this is 8 miles west of town, so she did not head toward campus. She walked towards Whiteland Plaza. And she was found by a Sunday school teacher who was cutting through some fields on his way to Sunday school. This is the airport. This is where they found her. And I tried to get the coroner's report, but I really realized I'm weird. I don't need the coroner's report. you look at the newspaper, and so much detail is provided in the newspaper that I cannot believe this does not grip the entire town. So she died on the way to the hospital, but the guy found her. His name is Mr. Reeves. If you know of anybody who's Mr. Reeves, you might want to, I mean, if I knew that my ancestor had found Esther Becht, I would really want to look through his papers to see if he found any story about this, because it would rock the whole community. She died on the way to the hospital. Because the weather had been warmer when she was walking around, they determined, because the weather got so cold, they could freeze her footsteps in the mud, and it preserved her movements. She slipped in the mud, she lost her shoes, she got stuck in a fence, her coat was torn, she spun around in this field and got trapped somehow in her mental illness, and she just walked in circle after circle after circle, so disoriented, dehydrated. But when they found her, when Mr. Reeves found her, he immediately knew who she was, and he called for help. The Adams, her brother, came out, dashed her to the hospital, but she died. And that story just gripped me like no other. And then somebody rang the whistle at Showers Brothers factory, and the whole town just stopped, and they said they found her. The fella who was on his way to Sunday school taught at this church, Garrison Chapel. So as a reward money was announced in the search for her, they were going to give out, I think, $500. And the church felt kind of awkward. The Becks were Methodist. This is a Methodist church. The church is thinking, I just don't know if we're really comfortable taking the money. But they needed windows, and so they took the money. So I wonder if these windows are from that time period. I doubt it, but I don't know. It's just an interesting story, and that gripped me for a long time. And again, I asked myself, how long did it take for Monroe County to get help for those who had mental illness? And did Lena, Esther's mother, have anything to do with that? Let's move on to IU. Of course, you could do 80 hours worth of PowerPoints about IU, but one thing that interested me was in 1938, IU recruited Lawrence Langer to come here to run the physics department. He later develops the first cyclotron on campus. And this cyclotron and this work and this research contributes to experiments that contribute to the atomic bomb in World War II. I don't think Monroe County knows this. I don't know how long he was here. I don't know where he lived. I don't know if he talked much, socialized. I don't know if he was a Freemason or if he was a wet or a dry, but I would just like to know a little bit more about him and his family. Did he have kids here? Are they still here? Probably not. But he worked with Robert Oppenheimer. He was an expert on the Atomic Energy Commission. And the person who probably brought him here, who had something to do with it, was Wells, probably. The reason I put eminent commander here is because in the 20s, again, this drinking, let's have a toast to Herman Wells. This is his frat house, which is where, across the street from the library, this was Laughing Planet Restaurant is here. This was his frat house in the 20s. And he said that he learned more about leadership from this frat house and being promoted to the eminent commander of his fraternity than he did in any of the textbooks. So I just thought that was interesting. I'm supposed he didn't drink when he was in fraternity. And then I just want to show another picture of the cyclotron team there. So this led to one thing, led to another, and so the cyclotron eventually worked, converted their equipment to curing cancer. In Jill's house, maybe you remember this effort.
The cyclotron always had a semi-secret mission because any military branch that was trying to harden their hardware and software against radiation, our cyclotron was used as the source for,
A good friend to have.
yeah.
We were friendly, probably. IU, of course, it was Wells who encouraged the integration of Bloomington restaurants, and that's a picture of Taliaferro, and to improve the relations between black and white. And of course, IU helped us clean up, and we got Crest toothpaste. Yay! I don't like to think about hygiene in the 1920s or any time before then. Am I doing okay on time?
Yeah, you're right.
I'm on number 9, crime. In 1883, the Worley Bank was robbed, and they ran out of town on one of these. As he tried to break the safe in Ellisville, Harley Marshall gathers Dora Sedgwick and Frank Sharp to confront the robber, who flees the scene, but not before Mrs. Sedgwick hits him with a large rock. The robber escapes with his accomplice on a previously stolen railroad handcar. This is a handcar out of a photo from the Smithville Area Association around that round time. But this is Clear Creek, guys. But I just thought that's how they ran away. That to me was really funny. You know, the further you go back in time for crime, it's funny, but the closer you get, it's not so funny. So I'm trying to stay way back then. In 1903, a gang of 30 men busted into a house on 8th Street, and they were upset because a white woman with 2 white girl teenage daughters were living together with an African American man. And the mob ran into the house, pulled Rebecca and Ida, the girls, as well as the black man, out of the house and beat them with barbed wire. And they said, one of the guys said, well, we gave him 15 days to leave, and he didn't. So we thought we would teach him a lesson. So you can imagine in 1903, reading this, you're thinking, really, really, this is where we are. Well, it was a mob of 30. It was dark at night. Nobody has their head, you know, maybe they're wearing caps, I don't know. But the governor finds this out, and he slams on us hard. And he says, we will not have this. So police were laid off, lots of miscommunication and lots of anger, but we tried to improve. One of the responses was, we need more police officers. So in 1905, we got extra police. And in 1907, that was that law that said that we can't have any blind tigers, so we need more police. So enter Kay Fullen, 1909. Fullen was charged with operating a blind tiger. In June of 1919, police raid former IU law student Faye Cullen's rooming place to confiscate over 500 quarts of whiskey. He's charged with running a blind tiger, and he gets 2 big shots attorneys in Monroe County to help him. And one of those attorneys is a former mayor. Let me see. I've got more on Faye. Let's see if I can get this out. So that's June 28th. September, he gets charged with running a blind tiger. Those 500 quarts of whiskey, it was discovered, was turned over to the hospital. Or for chemical analysis. November 1919, police arrest Faye Cullen at Dunn and 9th Street for running a blind tiger on wheels. They confiscate 18 quarts of whiskey that he had traveled with to deliver to an unknown customer. He's a former IU student, and so he's still at it. He was charged, and I always wanted to find out whatever happened to him. He became a politician. So that was 1919, but going back looking at prohibition a little bit more, for state prohibition, the blind tiger issue, 1909, 1910 was a real rough go for Monroe County police officers and sheriff's department. I don't know when they get their first automobile. I'm thinking the automobile is invented 1908, 1909. I don't know when the police department gets theirs. But 1910, there's an Italian limestone quarry colony in Sanders. And these day laborers, it's hot, it's bored, you know, what else are they gonna do? I don't think they can grab a bus and go into Bloomington to go to a dance or a prayer meeting. So they get on each other's nerves, and these Italians are in the news quite a bit. And I will just say I've got like 5 pages of news headlines with these guys. And so eventually one Italian gets mad at another Italian and they kill him. And the town is freaked out in Sanders. It's a small town, so some of them people just leave. They just like, it's too scary. And I just don't know what kind of burden it was for the sheriff's department. Then there's the trouble for the Greeks, and again, the newspapers are covering them as profiles of their immigrant status or their ethnic identities. So the Italians, and then we've got the Greeks. So Peter and Harry Costas in 1927 are running the Book Nook, and Peter, they get arrested, and they're told, the court or the prosecutor is saying that they are allowing IU students to spike the drinks. And Peter Costas is thinking, I sell them Coca-Cola. That's what I do. And I'm not gonna cave to this pressure. But he does get a $500 fine and 30 days in the pen, but they suspend that. But IU is determined to put him away to set him as an example, because IU wants to put an end to moral indiscretions. My grandmother was down here as a Phi Mu, and she, in her older years, all she did was listen to Hoagie Carmichael the whole time. And I'm thinking, she knows the place I'm talking about right now. In 1941, the circulation manager for the newspaper got a little frustrated with her ex-lover, who found a prettier young thing, and so she decided she was going to end it. So the newspaper one day said, "Bye, Carolyn, have a good night." And the next day, they were covering her as a murderess. She's the one in the middle, the one that you don't want to make mad, right there. She was married to a guy named Mr. Payne, who was wealthy, influential. These people ran a lot of the the Indianapolis newspapers, and they came down to Bloomington, but they had a falling out. But she had money, and she had a lot of political connections. She found a guy who's younger, and she dressed him nice. She said, "Would you like some money? Get your hair cut. Would you like some money? Get you a place to live. Would you like some money? I'll introduce you to that senator. Would you like some money? Would you like some money?" And the young man said, "Yeah, I would. Yeah, I would." And he couldn't have taken her money, but she was older, and he decided to get something else. She decided that was not appropriate. This is the house that she practiced her shooting, in the basement. What street is that? This is North Washington, I think. A lot of the houses look alike. Let's see if I have it. It's in the timeline. I don't have it on my slide. I'm sorry. But she was financially secure. She had everything going to her. But the year before, or maybe months before, she had gotten in an automobile accident. Interestingly, she was with her ex-lover. He hadn't had a scratch on him, but she wasn't wearing her seatbelt. And she broke her jaw. Now, you can imagine a woman in her 40s losing her jaw, and at the same time, she just lost it. But she was going to teach him a lesson, and this is the house that she walked up to, and she shot him through the window. The window was open. She said, "Pop, pop, pop." And this is the family, in the family, where this man was visiting, was the Greek candy shop owner's house next to Indiana Theater. I can't remember his name. Nickus. It was his house, and he had a baby in the house. So this is south of Shalom Center on Walnut. And the guy who got shot and died said, "She got me," and he said it was Carolyn. And so right away she went to trial, and I think she served 3 years, 2 years,
Yeah,
maybe.
I look at a lot of old newspapers.
Yes.
That was in the paper forever, every day almost, the trial and everything else that went with it.
So that was 1941 during the World War, and I'm just thinking people just didn't have a tolerance for it. They just were focused on other things. And so I think they said, oh, she's crazy, and we'll let her go. She ended up coming back to Bloomington and being a matron of a hotel. The National Hotel? No, that's not the name of it. Anyway, it was close to the Beeline on 6th Street. Lincoln Hotel, maybe? Anyway, I'm sorry. I'm digressing. But she didn't do very lot of money. She had a good lawyer, we'll just say that. Who was her lawyer?
East?
No, it started with an S, I think. I'll think of it. She had a lawyer, his name was Mr. Lecky. Arts and culture, our final topic, and after crime gets ugly, let's just turn to beauty, shall we? Our higher selves. 1896 was one of our first, this may have been the first women's organization in Monroe County, the 19th Century Club. The reason I studied the 19th Century Club was because a member of the club, which is still in existence, provided the library with their archives because these are the ladies who fought for the money for Andrew Carnegie to build a library. So that's why we ended up with the archives. But I read some of their logs, and it started off as a reading book club, a reading group, and the women were part of this franchise where they would get materials delivered to them they'd buy into the subscription service, and they would get books delivered to them, and the books would be The History of George Washington, How to Improve Your Life with Benjamin Franklin. And over time, these women were like, are we entertained yet? And they said no, because this is 1896, and look at how tight my skirt is, and I can't breathe, and can we do something? So the women started over time. There were 12, it was limited to 12 ladies, and you had to be invited in, and only could be invited in if there's a vacancy. So these women became very close. They were often talking about how we're not going to eat anymore at our group. Well, no, we have to eat. Oh, we can't eat. Okay, only the thin girls can go into the kitchen. That's what they said in their minutes. So, but over time, they said enough of this reading literature. Let's do something. I think that a lot of things were happening that they just decided we have influence, we have money, we have husbands who have influence. They're part of the chamber, part of the university. I think we can improve this town. So it's these ladies that improve art and culture and the hospital and hygiene, and they keep us inspired not to drink. But the women's are the Adams, Carruthers, Johnson, Perry, Harris, Mrs. Lena Beck, Swain, Shoemaker, Lyons, Irwin, Howe, the first guy who owns the first car, Pearson, and it goes on from there. But right before then, the female seminary is established, and that is some of these ladies coming out of that, I think. But that female seminary is where this building is. Now, one center, this Freemason Lodge. That's where the female seminary was. This, of course, is built in 1925. But the ladies do try to bring in art and culture. And this is a photo of T.C. Steele, and he's working with IU in 1895. They're negotiating whether or not he's going to paint all of the portraits of IU bigwigs. This is a snapshot of his studio. But again, focusing on the 20s, Hoagie Carmichael graduates high school. Now, if you think back on everything that's going on in Monroe County in the 20s, he's around during this time. So when you listen to his music and you know Esther Beck disappears, I'm thinking, does he write about that? And what else does he write about? The wets and the dries. But in 1920, public dances at Bloomington's Town Hall are banned by the city because of their harmful nature. And this is the year that he's graduating high school. Such harmful features include the ways in which young men and women dance with one another, as well as the dance's innovation to everyone who wishes to attend. So this, to me, says everybody can hang out, and I think that was a problem. I don't know who they're talking about, everybody. Are they talking about two people a different color? I don't know. But they aren't going to put that in the paper. Hoagie Carmichael graduates, and then he, of course, attends IU. In his yearbook, they say that he is a great favorite with the girls. In 1926, police are called when a group of women are a group of people are dancing the Charleston too aggressively. IU police attend annual freshman ball is stopped, or Indiana University's annual freshman ball is stopped by police when students refuse to stop dancing. A dance that is banned due to the state building inspector who's freaking out because the building can't sustain the rockin' and the rollin'. So the police come and say, gotta stop, things are gonna blow. And several windows are broken as students attempt to flee from the police. This is the second time within a few days that such an incident has occurred. So you can't stop the music. Again, so I'm thinking, this is what Hoagie Carmichael's music was doing. It was very exciting. And of course, I believe he is trying to get on the west side of town, maybe towards Maddie Fuller, listening to her black rhythm and blues. It's a time from the 1920s where things are really fragmented and just rocking and rolling. And the ladies are clutching their pearls. They're like, what? And, okay, so not only that, but that's when IU School of Music is established, 1921. The theater opens to 1,300 seats. This is like you're giving your 7-year-old the internet. You're like, no! And so the kids are just having a ball. 1923, theater gets the pipe organ. Rachmaninoff comes in 1937, but there's no auditorium yet, so he plays in the gymnasium. I don't think it was air conditioned, but he's playing in November. I don't think it was heated, but he's, it probably smells like socks. But it was filled to the brim. This is the Depression, and he's creating great music, and I believe these women were motivated to just elevate us out of the mud a little bit. Let's get some nice music. This is what nice music is, not that Charleston stuff. But we don't get an auditorium until 1941. And this, of course, leads to wonderful music, professional, great dresses. And of course, Marian Anderson is brought to IU to perform. And of course, who is behind that? A drinker. That was all I had. I could talk for hours on the crime, but you can read that on the timeline. Please do. And let me know if you have any questions. I'll try to write them down if I can't get an answer. Yes?
I think that lawyer we were trying to think of was Sylvan Tackett.
Yes, Sylvan Tackett was, I believe, the prosecutor.
Right. Yeah, he lived to be like 100 years old.
Yeah, he lived, in his office was across the street where Goods for Cooks was, I think, near there. Yeah, Bud.
I worked at the Princess Theater for a couple of years, cleaning the theater, which gave me the chance to explore nooks and crannies of that block. And if anybody ever walked up the street, there was a iron sidewalk door. And that actually was into the bottom of the basement of the Princess Theater, where there were all these cubicles that were the dressing rooms. And the pipe organ was still in existence there. But the big treasure at that time, this is 1974 or 5, the theater had saved every movie bill ever played at the theater. There were stacks and stacks, feet thick. Some of them were ones that didn't play there. They just got promotions and then couldn't get it. And I've wondered the rest of my life if anybody knows where those thousands of movie bills went. The table in the center was stacked, honestly, 2 feet thick.
Yeah.
With those. And some of them were movie bills for promotional signs out in the community. Came in great big paper envelopes like this, and when you unfolded them, they were like 4 by 6 feet.
Yeah.
Do we know what happened to the pipe organ?
I think it was there when the building, the auditorium self-destructed. That building had a problem with drainage off the roof.
Yeah.
And the water would freeze and would pull the bricks apart on the southeast corner, and that's what caused it to cave in when it finally let go. But it was quite an impressive structure for present. It wasn't a movie theater to start with. That's why it was sort of odd. It was actually part of 3 separate buildings.
The African American that was taken out and beat,
Yes,
Joseph Shively,
Joseph Shively.
that's George Shively's father.
So he stayed around. George Shively's father.
He died by the end of that decade.
George Shively was the baseball player
Right.
who has finally has a nice headstone in Rose Hill. So are we mature now? You know, I was preparing this talk for the Area 10 Agency on Aging and Right Center, and we had a schedule snafu. So I hope you're not offended. I gave you a talk for old people. You know, it's real easy to talk about an era that there's no survivors from. They can't debate you. So you can just make things up. Oh, this is how it was in the 20s. I'm sure women loved to have a waist that was this thin. And I wish, obviously, we could go back and say, is that right? Did we get it right? So the timeline really replicates what the newspaper printed. So if the newspaper was wrong, which it never is, we just are sort of repeating history. And I would like to see if there could be fresh documents that come out, a diary, something. So if you have something in your house that's not a newspaper, but it's an original primary source, make sure you trigger the History Center and say, look, this is a different take on things, and let's just add it so we have a full color to the way things were back then. Thank you so much. Oh,
Did I send you that thing from the 1930s about the submachine gun killing? You remember that? That we found? Did I send you that? It happened in the 35, where a sheriff actually shot a guy.
Two bandits coming up, they've done robbery places, coming up from Bedford. Started chasing them down around Clear Creek, which was the original way into town, up Rogers Street. They turned on 2nd Street to the east, blocked the bumper between the police car and these guys that were fleeing. And on the top of the hill on 2nd Street, up around Dunn Street, the sheriff's department ended up having that Thompson submachine gun, and they loaded that car up with about 11 rounds of 45 after they killed the guy.
all the criminals died in it?
One of them loaded in Bedford in a shootout, and one guy by himself, I'll send you the copies of this. One guy that was still in the car, there was 3 police officers in the car. One was a city policeman named Alva Flynn. There was a sheriff, I don't remember his name now, and then one state policeman. The sheriff's department's Thompson submachine gun right on top of the hill there at 2nd Street in Dunn. They decided to fire a warning shot at him, but they warned him that would kill him right there on the spot.
And then just a few days later, the police department got their own submachine gun, right?
The city police decided to send
1939?
No, that was before that. I'd say 36, 34.
So where are they getting the money for this?
From the Blind Tigers.
From the Blind Tigers.
You could buy a Thompson submachine gun in a hardware store without any paperwork.
Yeah, I know you could buy morphine too. You could just walk down the street and buy morphine.
But this is more deadly, more things than Thompson.
Yeah. Yeah.
On the timeline, did he have anything about Dillinger having a hideout in northern Monroe County?
Dillinger's hideout in northern Monroe County. If I don't have it documented, I can't put it in the timeline. But if you can produce a source,
Well, I don't have a source about I've heard rumors, and I do know that I've been told over time from many different people that he had a hideout in northern Monroe County.
This is bringing back a memory. I think we've talked about this before, but I don't think I found it.
One of the rumors going around about John Dillinger in Monroe County is that he occasionally stayed at the Showers Mansion out there on Old 37.
Dillinger stayed at a Showers Mansion.
Well, that was one of the rumors. I don't know.
So
You can hear a lot of it.
someday we'll have a Liar's Bench timeline.
Surely you just.
Thank you, everyone.